It ain't me.
Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Jason Tucker, and this is WPwatercooler, episode number 233. Today's topic is documentation for your WordPress project. Let's go around the room real quick, get everyone introduced. Ooh, we got a newbie today. Joe, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, everybody. My name is Joe Howard. I am the head buff at WP Buffs. We provide ongoing support for WordPress websites. So you can think of us as a CTO for your website or WordPress project. Provide security, maintenance, website speed enhancements, all of the above. So yeah, first time on the show and happy to be on.
Awesome. Good to have you on. How about you, John?
Hi, my name is John Brown. I run an agency called Nine Seeds while living the life of a digital nomad all over the world. We've been around 8 years doing custom WordPress development. Currently talking to you guys from California.
Nice. Good to have you. Robert, how about you?
Robert Gilmer with Shining On Web Design, and I build stuff with WordPress, and I'm lead organizer for WordCamp Las Vegas.
Awesome. How about you, Sarah? You're muted. Try again.
Someone has to unmute there.
Man, if you guys mute me, you got to unmute me. I'm Sarah Weefeld. I'm the project manager at Zeek Interactive.
Awesome. I'm Jason Tucker. How about you, C? Tell us a little bit about yourself. They're muted. Come on, guys.
How did I get muted?
Because you have the echo. We're trying to
face is
work with the
echo.
echo with you.
First of all, I don't have an echo because I don't believe in letting the wiretapping listen all the time.
You are creating an echo somewhere.
Second of all, I totally forgot what I was going to say, but
Introduce yourself.
I'm Say. Hi, I'm Say. And you can follow me at Say Read Media, and you can talk to me. And yes, I am totally just as weird in person.
That's true. I can attest.
I do WordPress. I do WordPress
I can
stuff too.
vouch.
Also, just that's not what I'm feeling today. So we're good.
Speaking of weeds, Steve, tell us about yourself.
I'm Steve Zengin. I'm the founder of Interactive, and I lead the OC WordPress meetup.
Awesome. I'm Jason Tucker. You can find me over at Jason Tucker on the Twitters, and I blog over at jasontucker.blog. All right, folks, let's talk a little bit about documentation in your WordPress projects. When you document things, you know, most developers document by doing inline comments in their PHP, and then they say, well, what's the problem, client? I wrote all of the documentation. It's in the code. Feel free to go look at it. No, we don't say that. And you know, as long as you remove all the obscenities and all the things that you wrote in that code, because you know that part of the project really ticked you off, you know that you have all of that documentation. So what is it that you guys are doing in the projects that you're working on that you're writing documentation and then you're handing it off to your client and you're saying, okay, here's everything that I built for you, and go. So what is it that you guys are doing to kind of pull that off?
Well, we start with documentation.
Go.
You start with what?
Was I muted?
No, go for it.
I don't know what's happening here. Okay, hi.
I didn't say apparently.
I don't know what's going on.
We start with documentation. So when we start working with somebody before we even start doing wireframes, we're just like, okay, what is the site to you? What are you trying to accomplish? If you're replacing an old site, what are the problems you have with your previous site? And then once we've identified all those, then we start identifying what the solutions might be. And this is all just written out. So, I mean, I could have anywhere from like 15 to 30 pages of text before we have a single, you know, before we initiate a single Git repo.
Makes perfect sense. And so that's more along the lines of looking at what the solution to the problem that you're building for the client is. So you may even be taking a lot of that, a lot of the docs that you wrote up just kind of in your discovery phase and stuff, and have kind of elaborated on that, right?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. We try. I mean, because you know, it also helps you combat scope creep. Because then you have all this documentation, you can say, hey, you know, when we were talking about this particular feature, this is how we had initially planned for it, and this is what our estimate is based on. So if we need to expand this somehow, let's discuss what the impact to scope would be. So it becomes not only a way for everyone on your team which is especially important if you have a remote team and most of your team is just not with you every second of the day. Everyone has one place where they can refer back to say, like, okay, this is actually what we're building. And it also helps so that no matter what your conversations are like with your client, if, because because sometimes building a feature is like a game of telephone.
Yeah.
And if it's not written out, you could end up in deep trouble because your client's expecting this and you were planning to build this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I remember going to a WordCamp where somebody was talking about using like doc blocks to kind of come up with a way of structuring the basics of the documentation based off of the functionality that they built, either via functions or classes or something like that. Have any of you guys explored using doc blocks to pull that off from PHP?
Like pulling the doc block out of your code and putting a PDF made up of, okay.
Yeah. Or at least using that as a way of sourcing that.
So can I back up to what Sarah was saying just for a second?
Yeah, please.
If you don't mind, because apparently my mic wasn't working for a moment.
No problem.
It sounds like, I like what Sarah's saying. Like you kind of start with forward-looking user stories, and then your documentation at the end of the project becomes backward-looking user stories, right? It's
right.
A user will be able to do X, Y, and Z, and then the documentation is a user can now do X, Y, and Z. Like it becomes just the same narrative is a good way to approach it. We actually have for full site builds, we do a lot of smaller work as well, but we have a document that we put together now that documents kind of the original summary of work. It's not a full user story of each feature kind of thing. It's more, it's quicker, shorter than that. And then documents kind of everything we've installed on the site, how it's expected to work, what their obligations are to maintain it, updates, that kind of thing.
What are you guys using? Both Sarah, because I wanted to ask you that, and John. Are you just using Google Docs? Are you using a specific software?
For me, it's a Google Doc. We export as a PDF and deliver it to them. And it's something I wrote from scratch, basically. I think I got the idea of it like 3 years ago on water cooler and finally made it happen.
Full circle,
we have good ideas here. We do. What do you guys use, Ziki?
Google Docs.
Yeah, Google Docs. And the nice thing about Google Docs, and just sort of reflecting on what both John and Sarah said, is documentation is a living, breathing thing, right? So it doesn't just stop, right? It needs to continue, and as the project changes, the documentation should get updated. As scope changes, the documentation should get updated. So it is a living document, and that's why Google Docs is perfect for it.
I
would totally agree with that, but I will readily admit our failing that we rarely update them.
So we use Google Docs as well for, we provide ongoing maintenance for WordPress, so we're not as much building new projects, but when we provide documentation, a lot of times it's in Google Doc, and we really use that for our internal purposes as well. So we have, monthly tasks that go out to remind especially for me, I have to remind myself every month, I have to make sure I go through all my documents and update things. Since everything's so systematized, you really have to make sure that's, kept updated, just like you said.
Mm-hmm.
I think that your approach to that is great. I'd like to talk a little bit also about non-custom dev. So for example, even documentation on themes or projects, or if you do go in and help someone with something. I have lots of clients who, have a site made for them, and their developer or their, what I like to call configurer, didn't provide any documentation whatsoever. And now that client is completely at sea in terms of understanding where to go and what to do to even just keep their site running as is. Then they end up Googling how to do things, which usually ports them over to WP Beginner, which has some sort of code in it.
So I think what you're talking about is part documentation and part access codes, right? Just to run the site, you've got different access codes for all the different things that you do, right? You've got your WordPress login, you've got your your registrar login, your host login, all of
your
that
WordPress.com login.
Yeah. But all of those logins should be gathered in a central place. We just recently went through an overhaul where we put everything into 1Password. So we've got 1Password spaces for each of our projects, and that's where we store all of our logins.
That's great. I wasn't talking about access control, but that is actually that is a thing to talk about. Because again, I have these kind of hour-long meetings with my clients, whatnot, that are part of this program, but I spend a good 10 to 15 minutes, 2 to 3 times a day with clients retrieving passwords.
Yeah.
And they're all super apologetic, and they're all like, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and it's across the board. So this is a problem that is pervasive, and there's not a really great solution. Even like 1Pass and LastPass, I mean, those can be really confusing to kind of lay people clients.
Yeah, raise your hand if you have a screenshot of the WordPress login window with an arrow pointing to the forgot password link. you just keep it on your desktop, right?
Yeah.
Everybody.
But what do you guys think about the security of some of those systems? Because I've definitely thought about moving to like a 1Pass or LastPass or something like that. But I've also seen a lot of stuff that that a lot of news.
Yeah, they get hacked.
They get hacked, and I'm just not sure how secure it is. But I'm not sure if it's a lot less secure than, let's say, a Google Doc or something.
They do, but it's gotta be stored somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Sorry,
And
Sarah.
putting it in a
Are you
PDF
sharing?
that you can hand off that isn't encrypted or anything, and you're like, here's that PDF that I just made that has the arrow that points to the login screen that has the text that's written in there.
Don't do that.
So, but here's the deal about that, though. Go ahead, Sarah.
If you're referring to Cloudbleed with 1Password, it was never actually, like, no passwords are ever actually exposed.
Heartbleed? Cloudbleed?
Cloudbleed.
It was Cloudbleed.
I didn't hear about Cloudbleed. Oh, I love all the fun names we come up with for this stuff.
Cloudbleed was the Cloudflare SSL stuff. So
but I was gonna say, if sometimes I almost think that it's better just to literally write them down. For some of the clients that I work with who are very kind of I don't want to use the word primitive, but some sort of synonym.
So like in War Games, when he went and he knew where it was in the drawer, the password was pencil.
Yeah, like you can't hack that. You can't hack that.
Oh, yes, you can. Did you see War Games?
Look,
Yes,
all my
that can be
passwords are right here on my monitor, right
here in the drawer in the teacher's desk.
So wait a minute.
I try to explain to my clients that it's easier for them to be hacked digitally, so sending unencrypted emails with their password is actually more dangerous than having a piece of paper with it written down. So in terms of hackability, no one's really like hacking, unless you have an enemy, no one's like opening your briefcase and like, I'm gonna get their password sheet out of here. Like that's really not happening.
But the file that we're talking about, or the information that we're talking about, is part of the deliverable when you're done with the project. Is here is the thing that we built you, and here is all the supporting documentation that relates to it. Oh, and by the way, this little piece right here could also include passwords, license keys for the various things that they use for the plugins that they installed, or any of those sorts of things. So I'm curious what you guys do to make that happen, because I'm not entirely sure what the best way is to deliver it to the end customer.
So
I do actually the opposite of that. So sorry, I'll just say real quick what it is. I do the opposite insofar as I make them sign up. No, I'm answering his question. I have them sign up and get their password, and then I get the password from them. That's generally what I do. I make them sign up with their stuff. I'm very it's important for me to for them have that stuff. Exactly. So I don't deal with it that way. That's my solution.
But when customers come to you with an existing site, when they already have something, so one of the things that I'm sure we've all experienced is somebody comes to you with a site and they're like, I need to modify XYZ. And you get into the code, and not even into the code. You look at the plugins list and you're like, what do half of these plugins, why is Contact Form 7 installed and Gravity Form installed? What you don't need both.
Two contact plugins gives you 2 times the contact form power.
You'd think so. So we all get sites like that where you look at it and you're like, why do we need all this? What does this do? What's the purpose of this? What's the short code for this? That kind of thing. So it would be good to have like a PDF or something, not necessarily with passwords unless you print it up and hand it to the customer. But just like a PDF or something that details.
One of the things that we do during discovery when we're taking on a project, especially when we're inheriting a project, is we go through the exact process that Robert just described, right? We gather all the login information. We look at all the plugins that are installed. We figure out what's being used, what's not, why it's being used, and we do the documentation if it doesn't exist. And I don't know that I've ever inherited a project that had any documentation.
That's exactly the problem. Hey, John, what do you do?
That's because any project with documentation doesn't get handed off to new developers.
That's
Because the original ones were good.
Burn. Oh.
Excellent point, Mr. Brown.
No, I was curious what Steve was doing on the 1Password front. The reason being is that internally, 9Seeds has very strict password control. We have 5 levels of password vaults as to who has access to what, our own passwords, our clients' passwords, etc. But that is completely internal to the team, and we manage that really well. We don't have a good system for documenting clients' passwords in a way that we co-manage with them. And I'm curious, are you saying as part of your system, you have like a vault or a group that you do share?
We have vaults for each project, yeah.
Every single project's own vault. And is that the 1Password cloud-based system, or is it desktop? Okay.
Yeah.
We haven't switched over
cloud. Yeah.
Got it.
And one of the things that I was going to say is, there's a reason to use systems that allow multiple users, like MailChimp, for instance, right? With my clients that use MailChimp, they can add us as a user. WP Engine has it as well. They can just add us as a user. So there is no sharing of passwords at that point. Yeah. Client has their own password, we have ours, and we can both access the same system. And there's something to be said for systems that allow you to have multiple users.
Yeah, that's also true of GoDaddy does that with their GoDaddy Pro site stuff. Liquid Web, I know, is adding that. Flywheel does, all of the big hosts and stuff too. Ironically, the one system that doesn't do that drives me crazy is Cloudflare. Cloudflare has single user access still, which just drives me crazy.
I think that any system that is starting to at least tailor itself to developers a little bit should be like their first step. It's such a usability thing. It's such a liability thing. I think it's remiss of a service as scaled as Cloudflare, as important to developers as Cloudflare, to not have that double login.
Say said something interesting, that she spends an inordinate amount of time with her clients just digging up passwords, right? Digging up logins, things like that. Part of the way I sell discovery to the client is, hey, we're going to do this once, right? We're going to spend the time and get everything documented and on paper once, so that we don't have to spend time each time we ramp up on the project looking for logins.
Yeah, Steve, that's totally right.
So I'll tell, Jason had brought up the code and PHP doc and stuff, and I'll tell a little semi-anonymized story here, is that very recently we relaunched a news media publishing site that was built by another notable agency in this space like 10 years ago. Actually, I'll say it was built by Alex King back in the early Crowd Favorite days. And it was impressive that they had README documentation in their theme folders explaining how they had built their Gulp, SUSE, Compass-based setup. In picking up this project that hadn't been touched by anybody in about 4 or 5 years, it was grossly outdated, but it was at least still a starting point to figure out how it had been built before. It kind of reminds me that good development means not only are you documenting things for your client in a client-readable way, but you're also documenting things for other developers down the road. This was a great example. I ended up ripping out all the old Compass SUSE stuff and moving it up to SAS and Node. But point being is it was a lot easier because somebody had taken the time to put a README file in the theme folder that explained their build process. We don't internally at 9Seeds use PHP documentation, doc blocks very well. We put a little bit of it in there, but frankly, because we don't use a PHP build tool or IDE like that manages a lot of that, it's kind of haphazard. I'd be curious if Zeke or you guys are doing something a little bit different there. But.
Well, it just seems like a lot of the stuff that I've read regarding using PHP blocks and PHP docs to kind of pull that off is that at some point you can then parse all of the files that are in the project, collect all of that data, and then say, okay, here's this function, here's its functionality, and here's the various parameters that it needs to be able to, in order for it to be executed properly. And so you can kind of look at all of that all in one thing. Now, mind you, that's very much so a a developer-y way of looking at the project. But if you're a developer that's inheriting the project and somebody spent the time to actually put together great docs, it's gonna be really easy for Steve to just go run a thing that says, here's everything that's in this project and all the functions that exist, and here's how I used them.
Well, the thing, sorry, just real quick, Steve. I don't think that PHP blocks and stuff like that is necessarily wrong, but I think that if you have to take an extra step, even if it's just for a developer in order to access all the documentation, that is unnecessarily obfuscating stuff that somebody needs. We put we put all of our documentation in the Git repo. We even have our entire internal process in its own Git repo. So whenever somebody needs to access anything, we're like, okay, here's our repo of the code. Here's our repo of how we manage it. Go.
Well,
yeah, no, I get that, but I think
amazing.
the thing is regarding that is that somebody who's inheriting the site isn't going to inherit the login credentials for the repo. You guys could get hit by a bus, and now somebody else is looking at the project going, okay, well, all of this portable built into the file content, isn't there. And I now have no idea why it is that they wrote this thing, other than, maybe some things that are in the code that are, somebody getting mad about the part of the project that they're working on. So they're writing a bunch of obscenities into the comments. So
we actually, so the way we say hit by a bus plan, we call it the win the lottery plan. Like, I think it's still a little bit more positive. So if Sarah and I win the lottery tomorrow and we're not around, right? Then
that is a way better way to phrase that.
Absolutely.
Except you're still alive.
I literally use
so
this
you could
expression
still
with the client yesterday.
However, we put in our contracts, we're contractually obligated to give GitHub access to our clients, right? So they have the access they need if they need to take it to another developer. Not all developers are created equally. Not everybody does this, but we educate our clients that, hey, look, we'd like to work with you forever, right? But if you do move on, that's okay, and you have the access that you need to move on. We're going to support you if you need to move on, but like I said, if we get hit by the lottery, you're protected.
Hit by the lottery.
If we get hit by the lottery.
I like that.
You have to play the win, though. That's the problem. And when you get hit by a bus, you're not playing to win. You accidentally have something happen to you.
So if we win, if we win the bus,
I want to clarify. I'd like to clarify, you're still talking about the code documentation, right, as opposed to use documentation for the client, or are you also putting use and instructional stuff into your Git repo also?
Use all goes into plain language, Google Docs, PDFs that get delivered to the client. Just, removing as many layers of difficulty to access the information as possible.
Nice.
But you still want, within the file itself, you still want a good doc block that's going to say, what type of parameters am I expecting? What does this take? What does it output? I mean, standard param and returns.
Yeah, and there are services out there that will parse your PHP doc blocks and make them into a really accessible website, which to me is an easier way to read and click through everything and see what the parameters are. The same thing exists for most APIs these days, right? Like they self-create their own documentation that way. PHP Documenter is one of the ones for PHP doc blocks, but there are others. It's just I rarely see that done in the WordPress space. There are a few people I know pushing for it, love them, just still rarely ever see it.
Well, and there's developers that do good doc blocks too.
Yeah, I mean, some do it, and they're usually using an IDE, and they're working in PHP beyond just the WordPress space. They're in Laravel, they're in Cake, they're in Symfony. Like, it's just part of their process. I'd love to see more of that in the WordPress space than we currently do. Yep.
I have a question. What do you guys do in terms of documenting plugins and plugin use that you're using? Do you link to the plugin docs? Do you provide your own summarized version of that, or a specialized version off of what you may have configured especially for that plugin? Or how do you handle external components in your docs?
Go ahead, Sarah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, give me an example, right? So, you know, are we just talking about an off-the-shelf plugin that we've configured, we've installed and configured?
Yeah, like say Yoast SEO, right? Say you're using Yoast SEO in your thing. Maybe they don't ever have to go in there, so that's not necessarily the greatest example. But if you're using, I don't know, Enviro Gallery, or like, you know, some component where you're using, or WooCommerce, you know, you're using some sort of external component that has its own documentation, but that might not be the similar kind of tone and approach that your documentation does. What do you do? Or do you just not provide that? Or
so I'll tell you what we put in our site launch doc for our clients, which is basically you're using this plugin, and in one line, what this plugin's primary purpose is, right? So, you know, we're using Yoast SEO. It's currently at this version. And then we say, this is the most popular SEO plugin. It's what we recommend using. It requires you set up this. And we're currently using it for XML sitemaps, breadcrumbs, Facebook and Open Graph connections, end of sentence. And we do that for kind of each plugin that offers some core functionality to the site. The same is true of forms and whatever else. That doesn't say somebody won't come along later and add other plugins, but it gives them a very clear, plain language explanation of, if you're looking for this functionality, this is how we provided it. Just one
how
second.
do you document using it though? If it's a plugin that they have to use.
And that's where I was asking for specific examples, because use is really part of the whole system, right? The plugins and the custom code that was created make up one entire system. So a use doc is going to be, here's, like if you're using WooCommerce, here's how to enter a product, right? We don't talk about the plugin specifically. We talk about how to use the system that we've created.
That's awesome.
And part of that,
that's what I would consider to be best practice, just FYI.
And part of it too is that we provide training. And when we do the training, we do it on GoToMeeting through screen share, and we video it and then give the video. And then that becomes part of the documentation as well.
And you can integrate SideDoc into the site as well, and record your own videos to show the sort of custom things that you've built.
Yeah, we use WP101, Sean Haskell's plugin for basic WordPress tutorials. We put that in almost all the sites that we maintain on an ongoing basis. And then if there is custom functionality we built that requires some kind of user flow understanding, we record a screencast of that and put that in there as well as a custom video. Most of the stuff we do, we don't need custom videos to understand, but if there's something, we try to do that. Anytime we record a screencast, because that's the better way to explain it, we try to put it in there.
I just want to underscore that I think that approach that you're talking about, Steve, which is this is not a site with one thing and a bunch of different components slapped on, but really approaching it as a whole use case, as the whole site. I think that is rarer than it should be in the way that people approach WordPress sites. And then I think that causes fracturing on the user side, where they're like overwhelmed by these different things instead of these different components, instead of thinking of their site as one thing that does a bunch of stuff. So.
And the site users and our clients don't know or really care what plugins were used to make up the system. They just know that we've delivered a system.
But the document, the deliverable with what plugins were used and why, is really more for other developers.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
you know,
and for future proofing.
And a couple of times during this show, we've talked about handing off a project to other developers, right? Part of documenting for other developers is also documenting for your own team and your future self, right? so I'm not great when it comes to documenting my own code, and I know that because I've looked back at my own code years later, and I can't figure out what I did.
It's looking at your own code is the worst. You're like, don't.
Cool. Well, that's about it for today, folks. Thank you very much for hanging out and being on the show. We really appreciate it. If you like this particular content, hit the little thumbs up button on whatever it is that you're listening to or playing this on. And if you enjoyed this content and you want to get notified when we come out with more, hit the subscribe button. We really appreciate it. Go over to WPwatercooler.com/subscribe for all of those subscribe links. Talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.
Peace.
Bye.